Hey everybody, welcome back to James Draws Everything. Continuing today with drawing every country in the world's flag. And today, come on down because we are finishing off the Middle East. The last country on this particular series that we're doing. We're going to be doing the controversial country of Iraq. All right, so Iraq, ancient Sumerians, Mesopotamia, Babylonians. This place has an extremely rich history, right? Home to many, cultural kind of heritage sites. Recent times for Iraq, however, maybe not so good, right? So just the word Iraq, if you're a Westerner, if you're an American like me, probably the first thing you think of is war. And there's a lot more to them than that, though. And I think today might be a little bit of a lesson on not just Iraqi history, but trade-offs, right? How nothing is really, you never really solve a problem. Everything is kind of just a trade-off, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So, Iraq, again, very, very ancient civilizations, home to like some of the earliest writings, right? Babylonians. The gardens of Babylon, whether those existed or not, is up for debate, but it's definitely, one of the very early cradles of civilization, and of course, back in those days, Persians, Romans, even Mongolians, kind of set foot in this area. The Assyrians, which eventually became Christian, lived in what is now Iraq. So extremely rich history and no way to cover it all, but just to give you an idea before we get into what is basically modern Iraq, right? So around the 7th century, we have the rise of Islam, and a couple centuries after that, Iraq becomes a part of the Ottoman Empire, right? So the Ottoman Empire, basically right up until the 20th century, was kind of the king, the hot shot of the Middle East. And then, of course, their empire collapses post-World War I. And then all of these former Ottoman subjects are kind of carved up and divided up into nation states. Okay. So Iraq was put under a League of Nations mandate during World War I, and it fell under British control. So they became a UK administration in 1920, achieved independence as a kingdom in 1932, and then it became a republic in 1958 after a coup actually overthrew the monarchy. And like a lot of Middle Eastern countries post Sykes-Picot, right? Sykes-Picot is the kind of agreement that carved up the Middle East into states after World War I. It was not an easy path. You can argue that for all the faults of the Ottoman Empire, maybe things were run a bit more smoothly under their control. So this does lead to a series of kind of, strong men running the territory or the state of Iraq. And when, you kind of think of the Islamic world in like kind of cartoonish ways, like they often portray it in, I don't want to say mainstream media, but corporate media, right? Because I think that dinosaur is about to die. It's like they're all like, the unified Muslim enemy, but that's not really the case. Actually, the bloodiest conflict in the history of the Middle East was between Iran and Iraq, right? So you have a lot of, you have Sunni and Shiite branches of Islam You have Kurds in Iraq. Those are kind of like those are like always America's favorite go-to in this region. But they're in Iraq, and there's kind of some tensions there, ethnic, religious tensions, territorial tensions as well between Iran and Iraq. So pretty much throughout the entire decade of the 1980s, Iran and Iraq got into a very, very costly war where, basically this is kind of around the time when Saddam Hussein, like just right before this, he gains power in this region, becomes their dictator, and U.S. ally, right? So whatever happened to that? But yeah, Iraq, again, this war is extremely costly. So when this kind of wraps up, they default on their war debts, right? And then this kind of leads to them going after Kuwait for some, perceived grievances, some deals that they thought were unfair, and that kicks off the Kuwait War, right? In 1990, Iraq invades Kuwait, but they were, pretty swiftly defeated by the United States led army. There was some UN involvement as well, the 1991 Gulf War. And this required Iraq to basically get rid of all of their, weapons of mass destruction, missiles, and stuff like that, and continue to subject themselves to inspections by the United Nations. Say what you will about that, but of course, if you are Iraqi, you'd probably view that as like what do you call it? Like a violation of your sovereignty, right? So there was some bad blood after that. One thing to say about Iraq, though, is like, kind of prior to that time, this was a functioning state, not maybe by Western standards, but, you did have scientific academies, things like that. And that'll be important later. But, yeah, so Gulf War round one, Saddam is not, captured or held to trial or executed or anything like that. So, of course, there's going to be a round two. The party that Saddam ran, the Ba'athist Party, has a lot of ties to Arab socialist movements, right? So that's kind of like a big thing in Egypt in the 1950s, right, where socialism was kind of trying to creep into the Arab world. And I've said this a million times: socialism and religion do not mix. So communism, socialism, whatever you want to call it. Maybe the Arab socialists weren't really communists, but outside of Yemen, which is kind of like a bizarre outlier, that stuff never really popped off here. But they do have ties to that, right? So it's much more of a secular kind of approach to Islam, right? So like when kind of getting into the 21st century here, talking about like September 11th and stuff, that kind of kicked off another Iraq war. Saddam was not like like a cleric, a religious zealot or anything like that. The guy had a mustache, wore French berets, Western suits. So the way that war was kind of sold, right, is like the Islamic world against the United States, weapons of mass destruction and all that. Didn't really cut the mustard if you know the actual history of the place. So again, there's another Gulf War that pops off. A bunch of Saudi nationalists, perpetrated 9/11, and then somehow that wound up in Iraq's lap. And this is where trade-offs come in, right? Where I was talking about trade-offs before. Whenever you say anything bad about like the Iraq War, maybe not as much anymore, but when you did back then, you were labeled, anti-American. We need to, bring democracy and whatever to Iraq. And, anybody who countered that with any other opinions was, was like, oh, you're you support Saddam or this or that. It's like, no, of course not. Like, this was the level of intellectual discourse that you had in the early 2000s, and in many ways it really hasn't improved that much when you're talking to these types. But no, nobody is saying that they support Saddam Hussein. But again, you have to look at the trade-offs, right? Like when the United States went in and completely destroyed this country, probably at least 1 million casualties. I know that figure is debated, but once you get up to 1 million, what's a few 100,000, right? That's still really bad no matter which way you cut it. So again, they're basically a failed state now, right? There's nothing there. Massive humanitarian crisis, for a place that somewhat used to function, right? Like we're not like an extremist, like sort of a, conservative Islamic state, like say Iran was, or is. They had scientific academies there. Women had rights as far as like education and schooling, and basically they were bombed back to the Stone Age, right? So all to satisfy some neocon bloodlust, and so since then, it's been very unstable, right? So Iraq has been once you kind of decapitate the head of the Ba'athist Party, right? Because Saddam was executed. To understand Ba'athist sort of politics as well, this is another reason why people wonder why you didn't kill Saddam or something. It's because he really, wasn't that important, right? Like in the first Gulf War, there was Ba'athist sort of Islam is kind of more important, more like what's the word? It doesn't place all of its power, just kind of in one guy. So yeah, there's been a lot of terrorist sort of cells that have popped up since then. And then of course in 2011-ish, neighboring Syria collapses, and that creates all sorts of refugee crises that sort of pour over into this state. You still got the Kurds that are begging, for an independent state, and who knows what would happen with that, right? Because they've been asking for that forever, and they're always kind of like a little pet project of the U.S. just to keep in our back pocket so that we can always go in and start doing something else when we say, oh, we're going to save the Kurds or whatever. So yeah, well, that's a lot, right? In a couple minutes there. Let's get to the flag. So, what does the flag mean, right? It looks pretty similar. A lot of these kind of Middle Eastern flags. The green here is the takbir, the Arabic expression meaning God is great, and it's centered in red, white, and black. That kind of comes from the Arab liberation flag, right, which kind of has its roots in Egyptian sort of a pan-Arab socialism. Black is overcoming oppression through the bloody struggle, which is the red, to be replaced by the bright future, which is the white. And this flag was approved by a council in 2008 as a kind of a compromise to replace the Ba'athist Saddam-era flag. So, we almost forgot to write it down. So that is Iraq. And yeah, again, when I mentioned trade-offs before, it's sort of a country that maybe, doesn't really have a lot to do with the United States. You can always sort of, if you want to make like the America First argument, we spent so much blood and treasure to quote-unquote bring democracy to this place, and what happened, you left it in complete ruins, right? And you spent billions and billions in blood and treasure, and how many untold lives were lost, not just Iraqis but Americans as well. And yeah, and again, if you bring up that argument, it's like, oh well, you love Saddam, and it's like, well, no, it's again, it's like kind of like the number one rule of making decisions. Everything's a trade-off, right? You're not just going to solve the problem, but the problem that you're trying to solve is your solution even worse. And then in this case, in the case of Iraq, I think it was worse, right? So I'll get off my soapbox for a minute. That is the flag of Iraq. So I want you guys to let me know what you think. And yeah, we're almost done with this page. And again, we finished the Middle East. So I'm very, very happy for all of you guys that have been with me since day one. So if you have, put that in the comments. I'd appreciate it, because we are so close to the end here. And before I go, don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, don't forget to subscribe, and I will catch you on the next episode.